Sons down here were doing some light change outs in the basement apartment. So,
Well, thank you for taking the time out today to talk to these young gentlemen.
excuse me?
Thank you for taking time out of your day today to speak with them.
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you.
that's perfectly all right. And I gotta ask, with that accent, what,
I'm Australian.
I was gonna say, that's not British, that's gotta be Australian.
All right, we're recording here, and yes, we've got that recording. So we've got audio and visual happening.
Oh,
Okay, gentlemen.
What is your name?
well, my name is Charles Lusardi, commonly called Chuck Lusardi.
And what war were you involved in?
And my service, from a wartime standpoint, was the Korean War.
So how did you go to war? Or like, did you get drafted?
No, as a matter of fact, I started much earlier than that. When I was 16 years old in high school, I joined the Michigan. I'm from Michigan, Upper Michigan, and I joined the National Guard while still in high school. Matter of fact, my older brother and I both did. So I was doing it of my own accord. And when I graduated from high school in 1950, in June of 50, moved from the National Guard and went right into the regular Army.
And why did you decide to participate?
Why? Well, I don't think we had a choice. If you were in the service and a war starts, you are automatically going to be involved, unless you desert and go the other way. But no, as a matter of fact, it was a rather unique situation because when I graduated from high school in June of 50, my brother had been out of school, but he came and joined the service with me, regular Army. And we were scheduled to leave for basic training in Fort Knox, Kentucky, from Upper Michigan on June the 25th. Well, when our mother and father, our folks, took us to the Greyhound bus station, the newspaper on the newsstand said war in Korea. So that's what triggered us winding up going to Korea. We were in the service, we were going to basic training, and a war was on. Everything moved into high gear.
And how was this war? How did it start?
Well, this war started, you have to go back historically and look at it from the standpoint of the Second World War. Because at the end of the Second World War in 1945, the world made a mistake, as it often does, and split Korea at the 38th parallel, allowing the Russians communism. And Russia is what? It's the father of communism in the world picture. And Russia took over the upper half, the North Korean portion of the peninsula, and the United States retained the responsibility for the southern half. And in the process of doing that, they made a fatal mistake because it allowed communism to start festering. And the war started because Russia and China at that time had just also been taken over by communist forces. The nationalist forces of China were defeated. Communists took over, Zhou Enlai, and in the process of doing it, they were sitting on the border of Korea, as was Russia. You realize that both Russia and China have borders that touch North Korea, the upper end of the Korean Peninsula. So both of those countries were sitting there, and Russia, being the stupid communist dips that they were, Joseph Stalin, have you ever heard of him? Well, Joseph Stalin decided that, hey, this is a good place to set up housekeeping and see how we can expand communism into Southeast Asia. And in the process of doing it, they built up a pretty significant North Korean army, because a lot of the North Korean personnel had gone to Russia and been trained by the communists, by Russia, in military tactics. So consequently, the time came in June of '50 when Russia told North Korea, yeah, go ahead and attack. We'll back you up. They had already supplied all the materials that North Korea had. All the equipment that North Korea was operating with was Russian equipment. So that's the reason for the war starting. Russia was, communism is like ISIS in the Middle East today. Whatever they can do to start a fire somewhere, they do it. And of course, countries like the United States and the United Nations and Europe, they take a different approach to it, and often they get caught short because of it. So there we are.
So how old were you when you first went to Korea?
Well, when I got on a ship in Oakland, Camp Stoneman, California, down in Oakland, San Francisco, I was 17. And when I got halfway across the ocean, I turned 18. So I had my 18th birthday on my way to Japan, and arrived in Japan just after my birthday in Yokohama. And Yokohama at that time was a replacement depot, the main replacement depot for personnel being shuttled to Korea. Now this is just 6 months after the war started, because this is, my birthday's on December 24th, and in January the 1st, we were landing in Busan, Korea.
So we know your brother was also active, but did you have any other friends that fought in the same war with you?
Well, yes, but none that I knew of in terms of being in the service with them and having gone through any of the training that would have made us individuals who served in that theater at the same time.
So you made friends while you were there?
No, I never made many friends while I was there. My service in Korea was a little bit unique because I was with the 25th Infantry Division, 65th Combat Engineers. Now you say combat engineers as opposed to engineers in general, because an army is made up of about 50% infantry personnel and about 40% engineering, and then the rest of it is all these people who take care of you as you come and go. But combat engineers are only called combat engineers because in the way divisions were structured at that time, every division had its own combat engineer battalion who was an integral part of that division. So whatever that division needed in the way of immediate on-site, which meant more often than not on the line, assistance was supplied by that combat engineering battalion. And then there were a host, 200 other engineering, what were classified as bastard outfits, because they are standalone. They have no particular lineage to any particular division historically. So they serve based on the need. And these are everything from light equipment companies to bridge building companies to SCARWAF, which are military personnel in the Army attached to the Air Force, building airfields. So combat engineers are unique only in the sense that you basically, first of all, you're a rifleman, but then whatever your specialty is, you do that. My job turned out to be in Korea was as a bulldozer operator. Because in going all the way back to the National Guard, we were in the Michigan 107th Combat Engineer Battalion. So consequently, when we went to basic training, out of our 200 personnel basic training company, George and I, my brother and I, were the only two who at the end of our 8 weeks of basic training were pulled out to go to advanced engineering training. Everybody else went to advanced infantry training. And the only reason we found out later was the fact that we had been quote paper on paper that said, hey, you were in the National Guard in a combat engineer outfit, so you must be engineers. So we'll send you to engineering school. That engineering school was in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And in that school, our training, we selected heavy equipment operator training. Basically because we were both born and raised in lumber mills up in Michigan. So we knew that, you know, when you were standing behind an old steam engine or a big tractor or something else, big logs and therefore even bullets probably won't get to you. So it made sense to, hey, why not learn to run heavy equipment? Then you got something to, you know, keep the pest away from you. So we did. We both became bulldozer operators. So my job in the 25th Infantry Division was operating a D4 bulldozer. And a D4 isn't very big. It weighs about 7 tons and it's the smallest bulldozer that the Army had at that time. But it was also the most versatile because you could get it in and out of whatever situation you wanted pretty quickly. George wound up operating a D8. Now a D8 weighs about almost 30 tons. So, you know, you don't move it real fast. So it stays back a little ways. Still part of the combat engineering unit, but you just space them out according to, you know, how quickly you can move stuff in and out in a combat situation. So my job was running that D4, and I worked with the infantry regiments, the tank battalions, the artillery battalions, whoever needed anything done. It could be digging in artillery pieces, 105s, 155s, long toms, little ones, big ones, digging in half tracks, digging in tanks. Main job was cutting roads up ridges because we were in a static position much of the time, particularly after mid 51. We got stuck on the 38th because of diplomatic, I call it stupidity, because in essence it is diplomacy that often kills more people than war itself. Diplomacy is the thing that puts us in positions where we have men put at risk needlessly in many respects. But anyway, I spent my time up there trying to cut roads up ridges where we had static installations. Some of them you may have heard of, like Heartbreak Ridge, White Castle. Several of these were units that were stuck in position and almost under constant attack from day to day from the China. By this time we're fighting the Chinese, not the North Koreans. And the biggest problem was getting supplies into them without having to have a whole host of Korean laborers or our own people hauling supplies in and then carrying wounded out. So if I could the closer I could put a road, and when you say a road, I build roads around here that are about the same thing as what I built over there. They're really good for Jeeps. That's about the biggest thing you're going to get on them. But they carry supplies in, ammunition, food. They carry the wounded back out. So that was my job. I worked one just by myself on that machine 90% of the time. The other 10% of the time, they were on a few occasions, well, probably less than 10. Less than 10% of the time, there was somebody with me, and that somebody was always my brother. When he lost a piece of equipment, because everything we were operating was what we called rust buckets. It was equipment that came out of Japan, Okinawa, the Philippines, and had been used in the Second World War. So it was literally worn out, and most of it was so rusty that, well, in George's case, operating a D4, and the overhead frame on it literally fell off and almost killed him. Well, had to go wait until they could get another bulldozer for him, so on occasions like that, he'd come up and work with me, and they'd send him up with some other. We have someone else.
You're busy.
Uh-huh. We're in the middle of a interview. How you doing, Mandy?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Sarah inside?
She's inside. Go right on in. She's in there with Esther.
Okay.
But anyway, that's the long version. So I didn't know, when I came out of there, I didn't know anybody. You didn't want to know anybody. The ones that were coming out, you know, laying on a stretcher on a Jeep or something. And we're talking about winters and summers and falls. And the weather made a big difference too, because the only good thing about the winter was that there wasn't as much stink. Because the smell of areas like that after, in the summertime, in hot weather, it's pretty bad. Okay, whatever. More
So
questions?
you said you saw lots of action and lots of gunfights, right? Did you see any
See you, Mandy.
particular scary events that happened?
Well, here's one of the problems. When you're operating a piece of equipment, like a bulldozer, have you been around heavy equipment at all?
No.
You have no idea how much noise it makes. Everybody knows you're there, but you don't know who's there. You don't have that option. Your sound is blanked out. As a matter of fact, I was working I have an excavator here, and I was down burning yesterday a big brush pile. Well, in the brush pile, I had some stuff that I'd thrown in there, and there were some aerosol cans. Have you ever heard an aerosol can go off when there's any fire? It's like a hand grenade. And you don't want to be close because you could get some shrapnel out of it. But they make a heck of a boom. So I got done. I came up here last night. Sarah says, "What was that big boom down there?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I didn't hear it. I was running the excavator. So, you know, no, I often get this question asked in high schools. Were you shot at? I don't know. Maybe so. I think so, but I'm still here. When I picked up that bulldozer, when they took me to it, it was sitting in the middle of well, not quite a rice paddy, but a little, what was left of a little wheat stubble patch, and nobody there. So they dumped me off with a case of sea rations, a grease gun, my bedroll, and I had my M1 rifle. You always carry your M1. I had 6 hand grenades, which I put in the toolbox on the equipment to keep those wrapped up in an old t-shirt, put them in there. And that was it. And, you know, from there on, you're living, if you ignore me, you don't argue about it. But then you live on, under, and around that piece of equipment. It's your home. You have a half of a shelter half. Pup tent. Pup tents come in 2 pieces. All right, 2 men have, each guy has half of it. Did you know that? No, in certain, you know, you don't have your whole tent. You got a buddy system. If you're in the infantry, there's two infantry guys, each one's got a half of a shelter half. So you tied them together at night and you could put one up if you weren't in a foxhole. Well, I only had half of one, but that's okay because I could just tie it to the track and peg it down over on the other side and I could sleep under there. If it was in a real bad situation where I wasn't too happy sleeping under just a piece of canvas, I'd just take the blade and make a nice flat cut and then sleep underneath the cat. It gets kind of claustrophobic, but you know, it's still a lot better. So I didn't get to know anybody. The people I met were only the people that I was hauled to, and the truck would come along wherever I was and say, load her up. And we hardly ever used lowboys up there, because again, they were too big to get in and out fast. So a D4 was big enough, small enough, that I could be hauled in the back end of what they call a 5-ton dump truck, like the big dump trucks you see going around here. Well, if I backed my D4 in there backwards and let the blade hang out the back end, it fit. Didn't help the truck much because I kind of bent them up. But that was how I moved that cat from point to point. Somebody would come along and say, hey, load her up. You're done here. It didn't matter whether you were done or not. If somebody said, go, you just went. And we'd put that thing in the back of the truck. I could build a ramp if I wasn't in a position where I could get the truck in a hole or something to back into it. I'd build a ramp back into it. But then they'd take you somewhere, more often than not, you couldn't get off the roads. The roads were maybe 10 feet wide on the top, usually on a dike, because you got rice paddies on both sides. And wherever you stop, how do you get out of the truck? How do you get the cat down on the ground again? Well, that became a game, because what I would do is tell the driver, and usually the drivers were at least 18 years old. They were just like the rest of us. And I tell them, okay, here's what I'm going to do. The cat's still running. Never shut it off. Just put it in there and lock it in. I said, I'm going to get on the cat, and you're going to dump the bed up, and I'm going to slide out, and the blade's going to hit the ground. And when it hits the ground, then you go like the devil. And if you don't go fast enough, I'm going to have your tailgate. So they tried to save their tailgate. So off they go. Sure enough, usually it would wind up hanging by one chain. So they had this truck that they were upset about losing their tailgate. But I was on the ground, and it was a terrible shock. I mean, but at my age, you know, it was just part of the game. I could stand it. I wouldn't do it today.
What were the conditions like in Korea?
Well, depending on who you were with and what the weather was like. So when you say conditions, both from the standpoint of the action going on or the lack of it, if you could be with an artillery outfit, that was pretty good, because you were usually 1 to 3 miles behind the line. And they were, all you had to worry about there was the enemy's artillery incoming. But they were pretty nice because they were static, and I would build revetments around the front of their artillery pieces. And the only thing you had to be careful of is, and I learned quickly, first time I ever worked with an artillery outfit, if they got what was called a fire mission, which meant that, okay, we're going to start lobbing shells over to some point that somebody designated for us, and I happened to be in front of them pushing up a revetment, they'd get pretty frantic about telling me to get the heck out of the way, because you didn't want to be in. The concussion was pretty nasty, so you'd get out of there. But if you were with an artillery outfit, it was pretty nice, because they had mess halls, had a big tent, they had cooks, they get 5-in-1 rations, gallon cans, everything from potatoes to you name it. And so if you were with them, you'd really have something better to eat. than C rations. And the C rations that we were eating in Korea in 51, 52 were leftover stuff from the Second World War. So on top of the can, so, you know, manufactured in 1945. But it was still good. As long as the can wasn't rusty, it was edible. But if you were with a tank outfit, that wasn't quite as good because they were always placed a little closer to the line, and oftentimes something would happen where everybody was trying to get rid of tanks. So it wasn't too good to be around them. And I wouldn't want to be a person who was a tanker, because that was a tough job to have. That was like living in a coffin. But the conditions varied. It depended on the time of year also, weather-wise. Part of the year it was so dusty that you couldn't see yourself for nothing, and you'd wind up at the end of I want to say a day. Your days never ended. There were no Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays. It was just one continuous series of the same thing over and over. And the engineers had a unique problem, if you will. After a certain amount of time on the line, the unit is pulled out and goes into what they call reserve, where they refurbish, get new clothes, do a little training, get reorganized, replacements come in to replace the ones they lost. But the engineering groups, you don't go into reserve. Doesn't matter what the other part of the battalion or the division is doing, you're still left in place doing what needs to be done until they come back. So you may be working with another outfit. We had 21 other countries that were involved. Some of them were, like Italy or Sweden, were just medical units. I think Italy had a team of, it really wasn't even a military, it was Red Cross, because Italy wasn't part of the UN, but they still sent a group of medical personnel. The Turkish brigade was there, which is pretty significant, and it was attached to the 25th Division. So I did spend 2 weeks with the Turkish brigade, which was a whole experience in itself, because they are a different, we couldn't talk to each other too well, because only a few of the Turks at that time in history, English wasn't being taught in schools around the world like it is today. So the Turks, only a few of the officers and some of the higher non-coms could speak a little bit of English, or some English. So my 2 weeks with them was an interesting experience, but they were an outfit that I soon decided I'm glad they're on our side. So anyway, that's.
And were you ever injured, or did you ever get sick?
I had I was there for 2 winters, because I got there in January the 1st of 1951, and spent the winter of 51, 50-51 if you will, in Korea, and that was a bad winter. The next winter was even worse, because I spent the winter of 51-52 up on what they call the Iron Triangle. It's in the Kumwa area. If you look at the DMZ, the 38th parallel, if you get a map, you'll find that right in the very center of the peninsula, there was a little area called the Iron Triangle, and it had that name simply because there's 2 rows of mountains that come down the Korean peninsula going north to south. And those 2 rows of mountains leave a valley in the middle of the peninsula. And the peninsula isn't very, very wide. It's, you're talking less than 80 miles. So that Iron Triangle area, all the main attacks going to the south came through that channel. It was a natural, it had the one rail line, which wasn't usable. It had the one road that went north to south that was significant, but in wintertime it wasn't usable either. So the Iron Triangle area up there was, it was just a bad place to be. Kumwa, Chorwan, Ponggang, not Pyongyang, Ponggang, G-A-N-G, is the northernmost point, which is in North Korea now. Kumwa and Chorwan are in South Korea, just below the DMZ. And that area there was, it's where we had most of our losses because there was always something going on there. But anyway, what other questions do you have?
So how cold did it get during the winters?
Well, didn't have no thermometer, but I can tell you, you'll hear people say, well, it got 60 below or this. I'm sure that it hit at least 40 below on occasion. The average temperature was probably, in the wintertime, was probably somewhere between 0 and 20 below. And the amount of snow depended upon where you were, because the topography up there is so rugged, and it's all granite mountains and high peaks and skinny little valleys. And depending on where you were, the wind whistling through there was pretty bad. There was an area called just to the east of the Iron Triangle called the Punch Bowl. And the Punch Bowl was it's a big volcanic crater left over from millions of years ago. And the Punch Bowl was one of the areas where also most of the breakthroughs were attempted by the Chinese. And so I spent time on my second winter up there on the the southwest corner of the Punch Bowl, just keeping a road open up on the back side, on the south side of the ridge, just out of sight of everything that was coming across the ridge, except for a couple spots I had to pass through that may have been when something was being thrown at me, but I never knew it and it never got me, so I can't say what happened. But that was cold. And that was so cold that I had walking pneumonia that winter too, but never did have any medical treatment, as it were. To make a long story short, the time that I spent in Korea, which was from January 1st of 1951 until April 30th of 1952. It was just one long period of eating dust, and the dust there was half dirt and half fecal material, because all of Korea and most of China at that time, fertilizer primarily was from the honey buckets, from the homes and businesses. They saved it through the winter months, put it on their fields. You know what the honey bucket is? That's human. That's like draining your septic tank. Take your septic tank, take everything out of it, put it on the fields and use it for fertilizer. Okay, you guys never have heard that term?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, honey buckets like porta potties.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, only these were really pretty bad porta potties, I tell you. One of the jobs I had with my cat on the line up there was, since we were serving patrols, infantry patrols and that, I'd be with an outfit and they'd say, okay, we gotta go up, we're gonna make a probe up in this area here, you stay back here. But there's a little cluster of stuff up there, would you go take care of that? Anything that was standing there were no towns to speak of up there that we operated in. Those were usually some kind of supply point or something if we owned them. But out in the middle of the countryside, like if you were driving through the valleys here, you'd come to a little cluster of 5, 10 houses, thatched roof houses. Most of them were burned out or blown up or flattened. But there was always something standing which could have a sniper behind it. And if it was standing and could afford cover for a sniper, my standing order was flatten it, just knock it down. Well, on one occasion, I was with a patrol and they had, okay, there's a cluster up there, go take care of that crap up there. So I went up there and there was the headman's house. And usually there are little houses and then there's one larger one, which is the elder of that little, it's not a community, it's usually a family unit, an extended family unit. And pretty nice houses for beautiful floors. The houses are built up about 2 feet off the ground, a rock wall foundation. There's a stove at one, fireplace built of rock at one end of the house, and all of the heat from that goes under the house, keeps the floor warm. And that's where the cooking's done out there. Keeps the floor warm, does all kinds of stuff. In the far end of the house, right in one corner usually, there's an area there that's under the floor. You just have a lid they lift up, and that's where all the potty stuff went. So it's a septic tank, but it's part of the house. And it don't smell too bad normally, and when the house is covered up under normal conditions. But in this instance, the big house was pretty good size, and there was some stuff standing, so I was in there whacking it down, pushing it over, and as I pushed into the far corner of the house, the septic tank, or their honey bucket, was about 8 feet square. And it just happened that as a square, if you take the diagonal of it, it's pretty long, right? Well, the blade on my cat was 10 feet wide. So, just as I pushed in there, I saw it, and I thought, oh crap. And that was appropriate. Because the cat, the front end went right into that, just across that right. And the fan, on a bulldozer, you have the option of either a suction fan or a pusher fan. Well, unfortunately, it was winter, in winter, and I had a suction fan. So here all this, to use the term that old guys like me used to use, the crap hit the fan, literally. So I was just covered with it. It just happened that there was a river about 50 yards away from us along this road that we were in. So I backed out of there and just kept going backwards, and got right to the river and slewed around. And I looked at that and geez, the bank, the water was down, it was all rocky stuff. And I couldn't tell how deep the water was, but the bank was about 2 feet high, and I, well, the hell with it, doesn't matter. So I turned around and just drove right off into it. And I got down into it, and sure enough, the water was about 3 feet deep, which just came right to the top of my tracks. But it was hitting the fan. So I just had the greatest shower in the world. So there I sat, but I couldn't have a cigarette. Anytime you had a problem and you felt something wasn't right around you, you stopped, got behind the cat and had a cigarette. Well, I couldn't even have a cigarette. They were all wet now and everything. So I was sitting there on the cat and I thought, well, God damn, I wonder how many fish there are in this river. So I decided, well, okay, I'll find out. So I opened up my toolbox, just toolbox inside, got out one of my hand grenades, and I stood out on the track and I pulled the pin and thought, well, I wonder how far I can throw this. And I had never thrown a hand grenade in anger. So I threw that thing upstream, and sure enough, underwater it doesn't make a lot of noise. It just woof, and all these little fish and krill and all kind of stuff come floating down the river. Well, would you believe that even here, out of nowhere, came these, I don't recall whether there was 2 or 3 women, and there must have been 4 or maybe 5 kids, little kids. One of them, a woman, had a baby on the back. Now these people have been hiding somewhere, but not in the, and I always had to be careful when I was knocking the remnants of these houses down, because there had been an occasion when I found a little girl with, she had a baby on her back. And how close did I come to pushing her into a pile of rubble? But anyway, these women came out of nowhere, and they went on, the Korean women at that time wore very long flower sack dresses. Usually they had quite a few on because they were probably wearing all the clothes they ever owned or had salvaged. And they got in the river and started dipping up these whatever floated down. And then they had the kids go over and gather wood together. Now keep in mind, here we are with a patrol of infantry over there. You know, so they'd gone out of sight. But we're that close to potential activity, action, whatever. But these are people who, well anyway, the kids went and got wood and they started a fire, and then they'd lay all this stuff on it and smoke it. And, you know, and what do we do? Well, whenever we ran into a situation like that, I usually had a case of sea rations or what was left of one strapped to my cat, because you have all kinds of stuff hanging on these cats. And even in the wintertime, to heat up your sea rations, you just take a can of sea rations and take your bayonet, poke a hole in it, and lay it up on top of the exhaust manifold on the engine and keep working while it warms up. And but anyway, you'd give these people everything you could give them, the kids or whatever. Those are some of the memories that are the most difficult. My problems were small. Yeah, I was there, but you know, this wasn't my home, and it wasn't being torn apart, and my home wasn't being blown up or run over or whatever. But these people had no place to go. But this often happened because you would always have, no matter what size group of housing or villages you had, there were always a few, just like we have today, who say, I'm not leaving under any circumstances. And they know their surroundings there, so they feel they've got places to seclude themselves and hide and whatnot, and shelter, other than the house that doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, more questions?
To this day, do you have anything from the war, like a diary or something to remember what went on?
No diary. I never thought in terms of writing. Matter of fact, I didn't even write enough letters to my family. While I was there, my grandmother passed away, and my family moved, and the whole thing, a bunch of things took place, but I didn't even know that till I came back. I have, probably less than 20 pictures that were taken at different times with different units that I was with, where there was someone of a photographer. And some of them are little pictures that are, you know, inch and a half square, and I can blow them up with today's technology. But no, I don't have much, not of mine. I'll show you some hereafter on others that were taken by others in Korea.
I guess the last thing is, can you explain what this picture is?
Well, what this is a tracing. What do they call it? What do they call it? Well, it's the name of an individual who was killed in the Korean War. He was from Oregon here. His name was Loren Kaufman. And Loren Kaufman is a Medal of Honor recipient. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for some action that he was involved in September of 1950. And that was before I arrived in Korea. Loren was a Second World War veteran, which we had many of in Korea because they were recalled for the Korean War. And they were the ones who had the knowledge and the know-how and the experience that literally saved us younger veteran or younger military personnel, because they were the calm ones, they were the ones who told you what to do and when to do it, and were helpful, particularly from an infantry standpoint. Loren was Second World War. He went in the day to the military the day after Pearl Harbor, and he fought through the Second World War from North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France, and survived. He was called back. As I say, he was in an action in September of 1950, which you have to read the Medal of Honor citation to grasp it, and even then you can't grasp that one man could do so much and still survive. Many did things of this nature, but didn't survive. In this case he did. However, in February of 51, 2 months after I got there, he was killed in another action. So his Medal of Honor was presented to him, as they say, posthumously. But he's from the Dalles up here, and as an individual, he represents what we would like to think is the best of the military in terms of everything that he stood for. He never married, never had a chance to marry. The veterans home, we have 2 veterans homes here in Oregon, one in the Dalles and another one down here in Lebanon. The one in Lebanon was just opened up here 2 years ago. The home up in the Dalles was just named in part for Loren Kaufman as a Kaufman Veteran Center up there. So when this tracing was made in this last go-round for the Athey Creek group that goes to Korea, and your mother went over to the presentation on this video, I was asked to receive this because there are no family members that could be contacted. So what I will be doing with this is going to the Dalles and go to the high school and find out if the high school has any way of displaying something of this nature for their students. And they can then look into the history of it. So that's the reason this is here at this time. But I feel honored to have it here because from a veteran's standpoint, I guess we think funny, but it's almost like having him here with me. And to be here with such an individual, it's my honor. Well, I can summarize the whole thing for you by saying that you asked about the health situation. I came out of Korea, George and I both did, we both survived that. Came back to the States, I was hospitalized for about 2 weeks in Fort Ord, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me because I was losing weight and things weren't, I was still operational. They stated, okay, you're fit for duty, so we were reassigned to an engineering outfit in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And no more than got there, and that unit was called up to go to Europe as part of a brigade. Now the unit that we were assigned to in Fort Huachuca was a bastard outfit, and that's not a bad term. But that outfit was a 597th Light Equipment Company, and at that time I was a sergeant. So when I was assigned to that, I was given a squad of personnel and equipment. But George and I hadn't been in the States long enough. You have to be out of the zone of interior. You have to be back for at least 6 months before they can reassign you overseas, unless you sign a waiver. And so we both signed a waiver and said, hey, let's go see the world. So we wound up taking all of our equipment from Arizona and a whole bunch of other outfits. We met again in Oakland, California. Now I had already gone out under the Golden Gate Bridge one time. Well, we loaded up all of our equipment, which in the composite unit was classified as a brigade. And that brigade of equipment was to go to Torreon, Spain, to build a SAC base for SAC aircraft. Well, we loaded all of our equipment on a big military transport, and our personnel headed out under the Golden Gate, down through the Panama Canal. So I got to see the Panama Canal. It's beautiful. If you ever have a chance to go through the Guntown Lake, it's really something. Got out in the middle of the Atlantic by the Canary Islands, and the captain comes on and says, hey, listen up. We're not going to Spain, Franco. You ever hear of Franco? Well, Spain at that time was under Franco, the leadership of an individual who was another dictator. Franco says, nope, we don't want no American troops in there. Changed my mind. So they said, well, okay, we will not be offloading in Spain. We'll offload in La Rochelle, La Police, France. So we're just outside of Bordeaux. And so we unloaded there, and we're spread around southern France. Our units were broken up. But so I had a squad that worked out of Paysac, France. And we were General de Gaulle. Now this is all historical stuff that you can find information on. General de Gaulle had become president of France after the Second World War, and he was what I classify as an a-hole, and always has been, and was right up till the day he died. But he would not allow